there, Mouseketeers. Welcome to the Disneyland Beat, where our toes tap to a Disneyland drum.
And we always whistle while we work.
We've all heard of the many tales of Walt Disney's 9 old men, the lead animators of the early studio.
But only recently are we hearing more about the pioneering women of Walt Disney Animation.
The girl artists have the right to expect the same chances for advancement as men, Walt Disney said to his employees in 1941, and I honestly believe they may eventually contribute something to this business that men never would or could. But the truth is we'll never know how many female animators there could have been that year, as most women applying received rejection letters. Almost every studio that existed at the time only allowed women to work in ink and paint departments creating animation cells.
The dated and false ideas the studio leaders and the industry as a whole had was that animation required a creativity, work ethic, and sense of comedy that only men had, and that women had a superior sense of line, color, and patience that was suited for animation, cell, ink, and painting.
The ink and paint department at Disney was exclusively female and was responsible for creating cells directly from the animators' drawings. It is a complex skill, but one that's often under-recognized, particularly the inking, which requires difficult tapered line work. But the position offered no influence on the creative process at all.
It was not all sunshine by any stretch, but Disney was one of the first animation studios to have women drawing concept art, creating storyboards, and seeking literature that they wanted to portray on the silver screen. A woman wrote the story treatment for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and a woman drew in the animation department, defining the look of famous characters and plotting the action.
You might notice when watching Bambi's opening credits the very female name amongst all the male lead animators, Retta Scott.
Scott was born in Omak, Washington, and she graduated from Seattle's Roosevelt High School in 1934. She applied for and received a 3-year scholarship to attend the Chouinard Art Institute, the famous school responsible for funneling so many Disney artists into the company.
Miss Scott moved to Los Angeles, California, where, while at school, she spent much of her free time sketching wildlife at the nearby Griffith Park Zoo. Upon graduation, the Institute urged Scott to apply for work with Walt Disney based on her passion for animals. She was initially uninterested due to the cartoon shorts the company was known for, but once she saw Snow White, everything changed for her. Her mentor at the school, a good friend of Walt Disney's, recommended her to work on Bambi, a full film which was in production because of her animal sketching skills. And she was offered a job in the storyboard department. How could she possibly refuse?
Retta worked on storyboards to develop scenes of the young deer prince Bambi, his mother, and the film's hunting dogs. The dogs got her first big break. She later described spending weeks to develop them into what she called vicious, snarling, really mean beasts. The male animators were shocked by the 22-year-old's work, as they initially assumed only a man could create drawings with such intensity and technical skill. Her sketches even caught the eye of Walt Disney himself, so when the film went into production, Retta was assigned to animate the scenes of the hunting dogs chasing Feline. It was really quite the coup and accomplishment at the time.
Ms. Scott worked at Disney helping to produce Fantasia, Dumbo, and The Reluctant Dragon through the early 1940s. By 1941, she is recorded as being one of the specialists in animal drawings for the company. But in 1946, she retired to get married. Her career had significant impact on the opportunities for future female animators and artists at the studio.
Retta Scott worked for the Disney Company again later in her career, illustrating several famous little golden books for Disney in the 1960s. She remained an active illustrator until she was again hired as an animator in 1982 by the Lucky Zamora Moving Picture Company. Throughout her life, she continued to impress.
Born in Rome, Italy, Bianca Majolie attended art classes in School of the Art Institute of Chicago and McKinley High School, the very same high school where Walt Disney served his freshman year before dropping out to volunteer for the Red Cross in 1918. Majolie claimed she did not know him personally, but did see him on the day he came back to school dressed in his GI uniform to say goodbye. Bianca said she was graduating midterm and handed him her Girl Grad book, and he drew pictures in it.
Miss Majolie studied art, design, figure drawing, and sculpture at several art institutes in New York City and Chicago before taking a job as a freelance artist on fashion assignments. Her fashion job took her places like Florence, Italy, and Paris, and she saw much of the world. She later worked for JCPenney as an art director and brochure artist. In 1934, though, she wrote a letter to her old high school alum requesting an interview for a position at Walt Disney Animation.
Walt responded, and the two met at the famous Tam O'Shanter for lunch. Walt was very impressed with her portfolio and a recent comic she had submitted to King Syndications and hired her immediately in the story department. She became the first woman to work in story, and in her first year wrote and designed the heartwarming Silly Symphony Elmer Elephant. Despite her skill, she was paid $18 a week, a fraction of the usual $100 a week paid to the men in the department.
Later, when writing their seminal book, The Art of Animation, Disney legends Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson credited Majolie with teaching the studio an integral lesson in story. They said, "We could not have made any of the feature films without learning this important lesson from Bianca. Pathos gives comedy the heart and warmth that keeps it from becoming brittle."
Bianca Majolie worked for Disney for less than 5 years. She helped develop early versions of Cinderella, Pinocchio, Peter Pan, and the Nutcracker segment of Fantasia. She developed several silly symphonies like Goldilocks and the Three Bears and Winkin', Blinkin' and Nod. However, it did not end well. She left the company, taking an extended vacation in 1940, and when she returned months later, she found her desk cleared out and her position had been filled. She did not work for Disney again.
She married soon after, and with her husband started an art gallery that she ran for years. She worked on commissioned paintings, glasswork, and ceramic sculpture throughout her entire life.
Sylvia Holland has a very impressive story. Despite great hardships, she had an amazing life and accomplished career. Born in England, she developed an early love of photography and music, becoming quite accomplished at both. She moved to London to study architecture, and at the age of 24, she became the first female member of the Royal Institute of British Architects. She fell in love with a fellow student, married him, and the two moved to Vancouver, Canada, and had their first child, Lenora.
Her husband got an ear infection after some cold winter shopping and sadly passed away before their second child was born. Sylvia was left to raise 2 children on her own. When the Great Depression wiped out the demand for new buildings and architectural work, she moved her family to a farm in a nearby coastal town where they lived for several years.
But when her son developed the same ailment that killed her husband, Sylvia moved her family down the coast to Southern California, seeking a safer and drier climate. However, she had to leave her architecture career behind, as her degree was not recognized in America. She took a job as an illustrator for Universal Studios, working on several films in 1937 and 1938. However, when Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out, she loved it so much she knew she wanted to work for Walt Disney.
In order to gain some experience with animation, she landed a job at Walter Lantz Productions as a cell inker for several months before applying to the Walt Disney Studio in 1939. She was granted an interview with Walt Disney, and he was so impressed with her work that he hired her in the story department on the spot, the second woman to work in the department after Bianca Majolie.
In fact, she worked with Majolie on Fantasia, developing the Waltz of the Flowers for the Nutcracker sequence. Her musical experience turned out to be very valuable for the studio and the focus of much of her career at Disney. She developed the concept art for the Little April Shower sequence in Bambi and also developed storyboards for what became Make Mine music.
Holland, along with almost half of the studio, was laid off by Disney after World War II. She spent much of her later career working for greeting card companies and quite successfully illustrated children's books for Whitman Publishing. She designed her own dual houses and a studio on her Ventura Boulevard property, and she found international notoriety breeding Siamese cats, developing a new species, the Balinese.
Mary Blair is probably the most famous person on this list and certainly the most influential on Disneyland itself. Her delightful illustrations, murals, and theme park attractions continue to delight audiences today.
She was a very impressive person. Blair also attended Chouinard Institute, where she excelled at watercolors and design. Out of school, she married her love, fellow graduate Lee Blair, who along with his brother Preston was an artist and animator. The three were a powerhouse of design and art, influencing and supporting each other for years.
Mary, who had yet to develop her familiar style, soon joined her husband at his first animation job working for the UB Iwerks studio. When Disney absorbed most of that studio in 1940, Mary Blair began her Disney career. She started working in the story department, which was developing Dumbo, Fantasia, and Lady and the Tramp at the time. She didn't really like the job. She found working under multiple veteran Disney artists to be really frustrating, so after less than a year, she quit. However, her sketches had managed to resonate at the studio and, more importantly, had caught the eye of Walt.
Walt personally asked her to go with him and a select group of artists and filmmakers on the famous Good Neighbor tour of South America. Afterwards, she was offered the role of art director for Saludos Amigos and the Three Caballeros, the first female to hold such broad authority at the studio. She went on to work in animation at the studio for a decade, heavily influencing the features Fun and Fancy Free, So Dear to My Heart, Alice in Wonderland, Cinderella, Peter Pan, and lots of shorts, infusing them with her unique style.
After Peter Pan was completed in 1953, Mary resigned from Disney again to pursue other projects. She worked for a decade in lots of areas, creating popular advertising campaigns for Nabisco, Maxwell House, and Pepsodent. She also designed scenery for Radio City Music Hall and for Broadway shows, and she illustrated a series of little golden books that is still in print today.
At the request of Walt, who really thought very highly of her artistic abilities, Mary was asked to return to Disney to work on the 1964 World's Fair project It's a Small World, and she moved seamlessly into Imagineering with great success. She not only created a beloved attraction that we all still enjoy today, but she developed several amazing murals for Disneyland and Walt Disney World that shaped the feel and look of the parks overall.
Mary Blair was a major artistic influence that will continue to resonate for decades to come. Her use of extreme color contrast was decidedly modern, and she's personally responsible for bringing that influence to Disney animation and the theme parks.
We hope you enjoyed our visit with these four amazing women.
In the future, we hope that retrospectives looking back into animation luminaries of the present will not focus on gender as much as the work itself. And we hope it won't be as necessary then to point out that the women in early animation were just as talented, creative, and hardworking as any of the men, yet were paid far less, offered less opportunity, and faced far greater challenges and barriers.
But we also hope in the future they will continue to look at the careers and amazing work of these female pioneers of Walt Disney Animation.
See you real soon, Mouseketeers.
See you real soon.